everybody. Welcome to another segment of Crypto World Radio presented to you by Because Bitcoin. My name is Wabi, and today we are joined by Nick, founder of Fuel Labs, and we're also joined by some of their team, Ruby. We also have Dow Chemist, Premise, and Snorlax as part of our speaker panel. And I want to give a shout out, as always, to the sponsor, Crypto World Radio. We have Nullus Protocol up on the nest above. And Nullus Protocol is a non-custodial crypto lending app with sustainable tokenomics and unique features for borrowers. It offers loans that are under-collateralized with financing up to 150% without the risk of liquidation through its lease solution. So, guys, this is a very special episode for me. I've been trying to get Fuel on for the past couple of months, and we finally got him. Really excited for the show. And just to give you guys a brief heads up, this conversation will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel. And, of course, you can catch it here on Twitter. Feel free to retweet the space so we can get more people informed about all things blockchain modularity and what Fuel is doing. Really excited to have them on. And Fuel Network is a modular execution layer for highly configurable rollups built on the Fuel VM and Sway programming language, designed to overcome the limitations of the EVM architecture. And something cool that I find pretty interesting is that they are the first optimistic rollup on Ethereum for payments. And V2 also excites me as it's being developed as a fraud-proofable modular execution layer. And the Sway compiler provides security and performance features such as safe math by default, re-entry protection, and built-in hashing and cryptography. So I want to welcome you guys all on here. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to coming up and talking some shop. God bless you, your family, and your friends. Hope you guys are doing today. So we'll start off. We'll start off with Nick, man, the man himself. Nick, how are you, brother? How are you feeling?
Doing good. Feeling great. Yeah.
Awesome, man.
Yeah. And thanks for hosting this. Yeah. It's really great.
Yeah, not an issue, man. Love to have you up here. So, Nick, before we get into the specifics of what you gentlemen are building over at Fuel, I want to get to know the man behind the project, and that's one thing that I like to emphasize in these conversations. Usually, with traditional general discussions and AMAs, it's all about why are you guys building this, how's it being achieved. But I like to take a personal approach and have a general discussion around the narrative, right? So what I'd like to know, sir, is how did you come across the digital asset space and how did those roads lead to the inception of Fuel?
Yeah. So I guess for me when I started in the space, initially I got pretty interested in Ethereum and in blockchain. My dad started watching a lot of like Max Kaiser and stuff like that, and he was just like obsessed with you know the alternate financial narratives and things like that. So he we I found a lot of crypto actually through that initially. And like in 2000 like 10 or 11 I started fooling around a little bit with the Bitcoin client, but it didn't really know what its value was. In 2013 I started to go a lot more ham into actually, looking at mining and things like that. So I actually started with mining crypto in my basement. So I was running a bunch of rigs, and I'm Canadian, so I was shipping cold air into my house, and like winter air, and then heating some of my basement with the mining heat. So that's actually where I started with crypto. It's really hot down there, and then after that point, I started to expand into looking at, okay, well, could I build something with Bitcoin? Because I took a look at the actual mining code, and it was, I mean, aside from just hashing, it wasn't really doing a lot. That's why I started my sort of deeper exploration into crypto systems, and how these things were working, and from that point, I wanted to actually build something. So I went on the Bitcoin forum. And I basically said, like, I want to expand the offer turn from 40 bytes to 1 megabyte. And then I had a bunch of Bitcoin maxis like explode, and basically tell me, all the different reasons why they don't want that. And then someone flagged Ethereum at the end of that conversation, and then my whole life basically shifted after that one person. So I started working with like a very early Ethereum, a very early community. Solidity was at version like point 0.6, I think, when I joined the space. So I started to work with Solidity. I started to work with some of the early apps, and I remember like on the Ethereum site there was 10 apps listed, and at one point I had two of them. So I was uh, I was up there, and then started building that stuff out, and then I joined Consensus and worked with them for several years, doing apps and infrastructure with them. Wrote a bunch of libraries, did a bunch of things, and then sort of came to you know want to see a different reality for the space because I'd experienced throughout my time so many issues with Ethereum's tooling or the way that things would work. I mean, when I started, we were working with like this original client called Aleph Zero, and that thing crashed all the time. Like I remember debugging something for 3 days, and then they told me it was the client and not me, and I just remember how that felt in the early days of Ethereum. So I've sort of been scarred and traumatized a little bit from the existing ecosystem, and I think I wanted to see a different reality for what blockchain could really be. I think that blockchain has some incredible special properties and potential. And I think that, with Fuel, we are trying to get as much of that potential out of the system as possible. And by doing that through sort of looking at things in a different lens, most projects are in a place where they'll always build the thing that they think will get the most traction, but they're not going to necessarily build the thing that is the right thing to do. And so with Fuel, we take sort of a different approach where we're not afraid to build our own language or do our own virtual machine or design our own sort of user experience and user experience flows and try to shape a different reality for crypto. And so Fuel is very much about doing things differently and trying to get blockchain to a place where I think we all want it to be, and not like sort of endless band-aids, patches, 30 different toolkits and 20 different community projects building what could be one company's worth of tooling. Yeah,
So
if that
one
makes
one
sense.
thing that I'd like to know from your perspective, being a dev, currently at the moment we have blockchain modularity, right? But in your own words, if you can put it as concisely and as direct as possible, what is blockchain modularity and how does that benefit a front end user that has experience with these DeFi applications and all these other chains that really have no purpose in existing, right? As you said, like we're reaching a point now where everything can be composed into one framework. So would love to know in your words, what is blockchain modularity and how does that benefit the current users of the digital asset landscape?
Yeah, I would say that so there's probably a few answers actually to how you would look at modularity. I wouldn't say it's necessarily just one. I think in the context of modular blockchains, you're looking at the concept of separating sort of execution from consensus, and you're looking at sort of a different approach to how you would want to construct blockchains at the layer one level. I think if you're looking at modularity from like a broader ecosystem standpoint, where you're looking at Ethereum and you're looking at what's going on in the rollup space, um, I think there's like a lot of blockchains out there, but they're basically empty. And I think there's some reasons to why they're empty. They're empty because there isn't the necessary security properties to hold significant value. And I think what a lot of this modularity discussion centers around is building systems that basically allow value to form, but allow developers to create different kinds of blockchains and experiences for the developers and the users that we weren't able to do before. So with Ethereum in the whole rollup landscape, we're able to create a multitude of different kinds of execution layers on top of Ethereum. And with other uh, different blockchains that are coming up in the space, like Celestia or like Avail and these other kinds of systems, you're looking at basically just a much cheaper, more efficient version of that that works a little better than Ethereum. And so yeah, modularity really can encompass a bunch of different things. It can also encompass as well a lot of different properties around how you construct these systems. If you want to construct a big layer one blockchain and go try to build a network around that, like you can, but we've sort of seen that story play out a lot. And instead, if you build your system in a more modular configuration, it can sit and exist in different ways with different chains that already have big networks and lots of value, and can actually just help them and help aid them in their sort of, their journey to seek, I guess, more value or more purpose. And so I think in a sense, modularity can encompass a lot of different things. But in the modular blockchain space, it has a specific meaning, and then in the sort of general concept of modularity, it's also just building systems that are more usable in more places, with more configurability, that ultimately will give the planet more value, more bang for your buck, in terms of these architectures, if that makes sense.
Yes, 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 yes. So it's very interesting to know that you guys are building this new virtual machine, right, to overcome the limitations of the EVM that you were describing. So, can you walk us through some of the features and benefits that the Fuel VM might offer compared to your traditional EVM? And I also understand that currently, at the moment, you guys are building V2 as a fraud provable modular execution layer, and
Yeah.
I want to come at this to the question of how does that approach differ from other L2 solutions, such as maybe like an Optimism or an Arbitrum, or maybe I think the other one is called Mantle or Mantra, something like that. And what advantages does it offer for not only devs but also users? So kind of a two-part question there, brother. Appreciate you, man.
Yeah. So basically, for the fuel VM, the main concept there is that the EVM itself, just has a significant amount of baggage from when it was originally designed. So basically, you can think of the EVM as like, your first instantiation of like like a car. You think of the EVM like a Toyota, and then you could think of the fuel VM is like a Tesla, and
Let's go.
mainly
I love that, bro.
this 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 is because, with EVM particularly, they didn't know all of the problems that they were going to face when they designed it. They knew some, but they didn't know all of them, and we've learned over the years, kind of how, you know negative some of their design choices were. It just ends up creating an experience for a user and a dev that is pretty perilous. So to name a few like big differentiators, the first thing is, like, the EVM is, got a bit architecture that's really wide. This ends up being really really baggy. It's got all these edge cases to certain opcodes that create all kinds of security vulnerabilities, and they're not easy to navigate. The EVM is also really hard to sort of navigate around when you're constructing really efficient programs. You don't really have a lot of options, in terms of the opcodes, and so the Fuel VM ends up trying to solve some of these things by providing you, better opcodes, a more clever, resource constrained design. So one that, again, like the EVM, for example, is really wasteful when it uses memory. Like, if you call a contract, it creates a new memory frame. You can't look at the previous frame, and this ends up meaning that you have to reserialize data between every call, and all of that stuff you have to pay for. So the user ends up paying a lot more to do things that, if you just slightly redesigned the system, you incorporated all these lessons and all these, problem and pain points, you end up with something like the Fuel VM. So in many senses, there's kind of numerous benefits, but the ultimate thing is the Fuel VM will allow you to do things like full native account abstraction, the removal of things like approve and transfer from UX because we have scripts. It's a better bit architecture, so it's 64, so it's more efficient. We have a revised memory architecture. As well, we have things like multiple native assets, so each smart contract can emit its own kind of native asset, and that gives smart contracts a sort of first class, approach to tokens that we just didn't see with Ethereum, and you had to create ERC20s, and that ends up being really baggy and bulky on the processing side. ultimately, all of these changes mean that you can have a system that's incredible for, again, value, um, both value stationing and value transfer, in addition to doing all the kinds of behaviors we typically see with Ethereum. But you can do way more. So in a sense, the Fuel VM is like EVM 2.0. It learns a lot from EVM and the design lessons. It learns from Solana. It learns from Wasm. It learns from a bunch of different systems, and you end up with a system that again is it's just far better for doing just about everything, in terms of the blockchain space. So that's how I would describe the Fuel VM, some EVM differentiators.
So you guys are starting right off the bat with native assets, um, sort of like how Thorchain is now doing like tradable native assets. So you guys are going right into that, rather than do what some of these other newer products are doing, which is just copying and pasting the same framework, which is okay. Hey, let's just wrap these assets and then bridge them over to our chain. And as we learned, when you have things like bridge security being very vulnerable. Like we understand that just because it's a wrapped asset doesn't mean that it's still the underlying asset. It becomes an asset to the chain itself. Am I correct on that, brother?
So you're sort of correct. I mean, basically, we still have a bridge to Ethereum. You can still bridge your tokens over. You're right in terms of the security, implications of a bridge, right? A bridge is going to end up being whatever the security properties are. If there's a multi-sig, then it's a multi-sig bridge, But basically, in terms of assets, so you can bridge all of your Ethereum assets over. We have a general purpose message passing bridge like Optimism and Arbitrum. So you can basically you can deploy your say USDC, and then you'll get a native asset on Fuel at the end of the day that is a wrapped, sort of like a wrapped USDC per se, but it'll just actually perform as a native asset. Now you can do other things as well, like you don't need to use that system. You can do a bunch of other things, but the point is that you actually have a lot more flexibility. But it ends up being the case that if you bridge something like USDC over to Fuel, you're going to end up with um, like a wrapped but native asset of that asset in Fuel's processing environment. And that's going to end up being a lot more efficient when you're doing payments, when you're transferring that around, when you're trading, when you're doing all kinds of other activities. So you gain tremendous amounts of efficiency. Whereas, like, if you do the traditional model of what we see with ERC20, it creates a lot of baggage. It limits the amount of scale you can achieve, and it ends up it ends up basically being a wrapped asset that is has similar scalability properties to what it came off of from Ethereum, basically.
God bless you, sir. That was an amazing response. I am incredibly bullish on what you guys are doing. I'm gonna throw an emoji. But I posted some
Awesome.
things for you guys up on the Nest. For you guys in the audience, I posted a few things on the Nest in regards to Fuel Network, including a recent space that they did with Spark, which is a UTXO order book. So I'm gonna ask this one more question, and then I want to open it up to our lovely speaker panel. But yeah, I wanna throw this your way, Nick. First off, before I ask this question, I wanna tell you your profile picture is insane, dude. I love it. It's the Chad that says yes. And one thing that I'm bullish on are developers that understand pop culture. And I'm a man of culture. So I wanted to ask you, sir, I'm curious about the decision to use the UTXO model that you guys are using for accounting and fuel. How does the model work as far as improving user app experiences and also some of the other benefits that it has for the fuel network?
Yeah, so UTXOs are really interesting. Initially with blockchains, everyone picked an accounts model. Basically, after Vitalik, I think, really popularized it. And we started with UTXOs from Satoshi and that kind of incredible Bitcoin design, and then we sort of gravitated towards more accounts model from that point. The thing is, UTXOs, when they're used in a setting for fraud proving, end up being really interesting because you can basically achieve very similar user experience to Ethereum, but you can do certain things that are state minimized. And what this means is you're going to end up paying a lot less, bloating the state a lot less, and making a more efficient blockchain. So similar to like Sui has like resources, for example, UTXOs are really cool because when you transfer a UTXO or you create one, the only thing you have to do on the processing side is basically Merkleize that UTXO into a block. And so it's a very shallow, small Merkle tree. It's not really that big. And when you spend it, you just need to notate that in a block. And the thing is, this ends up being actually really, really beneficial because when you spend it, you can forget about it in state. So you can just prune it and it's gone forever. But secondly, um, with Ethereum, you end up usually having to have this massive giant state tree of every balance of every account. And every time you have to do a transfer in Ethereum, you have to basically update this massive Merkle tree. And it's like, I think it's like 256 depths or something like that. And so every time you make a transfer, you have to update this giant tree. And that ends up really costing you on the processing side. It's actually one of the larger costs on running a blockchain node in general. And they do this to retain light client proofing and a bunch of other things. Um, but essentially, this particular property is really really horrible with the accounts model, and it is sort of required for if you want to have a decentralized blockchain that's safe, and so if you're in the accounts model, so the UTXO model is really really light. If you transfer a UTXO or you do a trade with a UTXO, for example, like Composability Labs here doing an order book exchange with UTXOs and predicates. If you do that, you end up transferring the asset or moving it around. And when you go to the database, you instead of having to update this giant Merkle tree, you just make one update and then you update a very, very small Merkle tree for the block, and that's it. So it's a much better model on the processing side. That's going to end up on the user side of things being a lot cheaper. It's going to end up on the scalability side, giving you parallel transaction execution, which is really critical to using all the threads and cores of the node's CPU to process transactions. Really important for scale. Ultimately, though, it just means that things are going to be, cheaper, better, faster, for everybody, developers and users. And it just allows you to get closer to this reality of typically in the blockchain space, you say like a stateless sort of reality. It's just one more weapon a developer will have to do state minimized designs, which end up being obviously more cost efficient, more scalable, and just better for the blockchain space. So hopefully that answers your question. But UTXOs are just they have some interesting properties, and this is sort of one of them.
Understood, man. You're making me more and more bullish. I'm learning a lot in this conversation. And guys, I want to let you know we're close to halfway in our show. But if you're new to this audience, my name is Wabi, and we're here joined by Nick from Fuel. We're here joined by Ruby from Fuel, and we're also joined by Composability Labs, and they throw some pretty interesting data about all things modularity stacks. And we're also joined by team members Snorlax and Premise, and as usual, as part of our daily speaker panel, Dow Chemist. So I want to open it up to you guys, and also I want to encourage you guys to follow all the speakers here, follow Fuel, and also feel free to follow us here because Bitcoin. We're currently undergoing our modular blockchain series. It's an educational series that's going to be presenting some pretty cool teams that are going to be releasing some interesting products over the next year or two. So feel free to follow us and turn on bell notifications so you can keep up with all of our shows. So I want to throw it over to some of our team members. So Snorlax, I know you're an on-chain sleuth. You love all things DeFi, brother. So I want to welcome you up, man. Thank you so much for coming up on here. How are you feeling, brother?
Hey, well, it'd be great to speak with you, man, and great to speak with the Fuel team. Yeah, I just had a question for you guys because I love getting to learn about all of the projects that could be potentially be carrying the torch for the next bull run. But I also love to learn about the teams because, in my experience, the most effective projects I've invested in and witnessed were the ones with the most effective teams. So I just wanted to know, what would you guys say sets the Fuel team apart from other projects, in addition to the fundamental value the project seeks to provide?
Yeah, I would say with Fuel particularly, in terms of our sort of design motto and how we think about teams in general, um, I think it comes down to like a good set of principles for our contributor base. So firstly, like in terms of contributors, we want to have a situation where the focus is on like the engineer over engineering. So we really value, I think, just basically how you would think about building a great system for developers. And engineering time is like a key piece of this. So that's going to be the first principle, I would say, of like, building a good team, and kind of building a team that ends up delivering something, I think, huge for the ecosystem. The second thing is, basically cherishing every byte and every computation. So this is like philosophically and in principle, something that I think engineers need to focus on, and what we focus on a lot with Fuel. So we really focus on efficiency, as like as a group and a collective. The last thing is, I would say we really cherish, basically developer experience over everything else. I think like we want to create a system here where a developer is going to love this, and actually kind of want to be a part of something that, again, is going to deliver a kind of experience and a kind of result, for the ecosystem that actually is sort of game changing. So on the team side, these are like our core, kind of principles that we go into this with. The Fuel like contributor base has like a lot of different contributors from a lot of different backgrounds. We have a lot of people from like embedded backgrounds, different backgrounds for compiling, and as well, obviously blockchain. I would say that like we have a big focus on our kind of general contributor base, and I think the goal for us too is to get to a place with a project where effectively all of that development can be decentralized and away from the core founders, and actually live and breathe on its own with the ideas we instill in them. But yeah, I'd say for our team, it's like kind of crosses a lot of breadth, across the board. Um, but yeah, that hopefully that answers your question.
All right, we'll pass it on over to Premise. Premise, my man, how are you feeling, man? Good to have you up, brother.
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good. Yeah, I guess I'll ask a question that might, depending who's listening, might be interested, because it seems like this is amazing. I'm just now learning about Fuel. But yeah, how is the investment? Where could people find where people are trying to invest in projects? How many new type of projects are you seeing being built around it? I guess that would be a question I would ask.
Yeah, so I mean, right now, like uh, we're pretty private on all of our like finance related stuff. Obviously, uh, we've got some critical support from some big players. In terms of the ecosystem projects, though, and getting involved with them and getting excited, I would say the big ones are ones that people like Composability Labs are building. So so the like Spark order book, I think it's gonna be amazing. So it's like the original name was the Sway Gangsters, although I think they had to make some changes there. Um, the Fuelet wallet, I think is gonna be awesome. And I would expect that I think with a lot of these projects, there's some economic incentivization that's going to happen. So I think that's very much the case. In terms of NFTs, like there's Thunder, and then and there's a bunch of others too, like Pepper Markets and a few others. Um, on the DEX side, there's like Elix, Microchain, So these are some awesome projects that are coming up. I would say, in terms of what piques my interest though the most, it's probably this UTXO based order book exchange, where effectively you can have a giant order book exchange. Think of Fuel as all these UTXOs. A lot of those UTXOs, because we support predicates and account abstraction, can become orders in what is effectively a giant order system. And projects like Spark are going to leverage this by basically using UTXOs to their advantage, and turning those into orders for an order book exchange. And so you can create all kinds of, basically highly efficient, highly parallelizable order book systems using Fuel. So this is like a really nice, I would say, differentiator of Fuel's architecture. And you can also pair that still with traditional AMMs that you typically see, AMM dexes. And so that pairing between, basically order book exchanges, AMMs, and potentially as well like hyper efficient things like futures and perpetuals, I think will allow us to kind of really demonstrate the scale that we can achieve and the processing speed, and really kind of showcase what Fuel's about. So I think that in terms of projects, hopefully it gives you like a bit of a taste of the landscape. You definitely just get involved in terms of writing materials and checking out a bunch of our stuff. I think helping the projects out with UX and user experience, making the products better. But I think for Fuel, we're hoping to ship with a few really key anchor projects, and I think that that's really part of our strategy, is to not have an ecosystem of like 5,000 random projects that were made in some short period of time, but to launch with a few really good ones that sort of tackle some key areas, and again give a user a breadth of experience on Fuel that covers most of the general cases of like lending, dexes, NFTs, etc. So but yeah, those are some projects to take a look at.
Nick, I wanted to introduce myself to you real quick, man. I've been in the crypto industry since December of 2017, and my first experience with DeFi was using Uniswap in late 2019 and taking out my first loan in Aave during the COVID lockdown. And, experienced all the DeFi stuff. DeFi summer, became full time in the industry after the Uniswap airdrop, and I've used everything on Phantom, AVAX, all these other L1s, and really, I would say the core batch of protocols. One thing that I've noticed is that they're working to enhance the front end experience for the user, and also work in things like liquidity fragmentation and all those things. So, it's guys that are building on the modularity stack, right? And what you guys are doing is pretty bullish. So, I'm looking forward to it. And, speaking of Aave, I do see that we have Nadir to beat from Aave. So I'll bring them up to speak if you want to join the conversation, man. If you want to talk with Nick about all things modularity and what they're doing with Fuel, would love to have you. I see some recognizable names here as well that are on the show. If you guys want to come up and ask Nick some questions, feel free to do so. Always love engaging with the broader communities. And I also see that Nadir has joined the conversation. Nadir, are you able to hear me, brother?
Hey, yeah, I just got invited up here. I can hear you good. Can you hear me?
Perfect, man. You just had a beer. Good, man. It's been a fun week, hasn't it?
Actually, think you misunderstood. I don't drink. So.
Oh, I thought you said you had a beer. My bad, brother. But yeah, welcome, man. If there's anything that you want to say, feel free to do so, man. Stage is all yours, brother.
No, I've just been really enjoying listening to Nick and understand a little bit more about some of the I don't know, background and stuff of Fuel. Even though I've been working with it off and on for the past 6 months, I'm now kind of experimenting with.
I think you're covering your mic, brother. You're covering your mic. Having some connection issues on your ends, brother.
That they're making kind of. I think I'm having connection issues. Give me 1 second.
Okay. Yeah, just some slight connection issues, brother. But yeah, man, good to have you up, man. Good to have you up. We'll circle right back to you, man. But Dow Chemist, the man himself, the man of the hour. You've been on hold for over 30 minutes, man. So I want to take the time for you to interact with Nick and some of the team here, man. So welcome, man. How are you feeling?
I'm doing great, and this is a great conversation. And there's some background noise sorry about that. I'm at a cafe. Yeah, I love this conversation. You guys touched on modularity, and I think it's a very interesting topic. And I hear in the conversation, right? I think there's two conversations happening, right? There's what are the benefits for developers, and then what are the benefits for end users, right? And so when we get into the technicals, I think for end users, right, Nick, you touched on that, right? You get probably like cheaper transaction and maybe even more secure execution layer. From a developer point of view, right? I'd be curious to hear what type of developers you've seen being interesting by Fuel because you mentioned U2XO. Obviously, you have your own Sway language. It sounds like it's like a subset of Rust. So it looks like from the outside looking in, it might be like, the developers who are looking at Arbitrum, Optimism, layer twos, and modular in general might be interested in Fuel. But then, like everything you mentioned about Sparks, for example, and the order book decks, it sounds like you also might get interest from the Solana developers who might be a little bit like jaded and looking for a Rust-based alternative that still give them like low latency. I know that I'm sure there's a range of developers, but could you maybe like touch on like a few types of developers that seem to be really interested in building on top of Fuel Labs?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's developers that. So I think there's sort of a situation in the current, like in the EVM development space, where developers can sort of do what they want to do, but ultimately they're constrained by scale. They're constrained by the complexity of just using the EVM and trying to get around all those problems. And quite frankly, I think they're sort of tired of just what it's like to develop on Ethereum. So Ethereum Ethereum devs are people that I think are people that definitely come to Fuel and are sort of in a place where they go, well, I just want to use something different, and I want to use something that's more comprehensive. So Fuel gets to have a big benefit there with Ethereum devs, where once you've kind of crossed the bridge a little bit, you start to, I think, have a different take on what Web3 development can be. And I think again, our sort of more vertically integrated, kind of Apple style approach to doing this is the way that we're going to get there for them. In terms of other devs, I would say the Solana devs and the Sui and Aptos devs are definitely people that they're the ones kind of doing actually a lot of the building right now. Like I know even Vitaly and his team are like coming from that world, and as much as those chains are interesting, and there's some interesting there's an interesting design space. Yeah, I would say that a lot of them are either fed up with the developer experience they have with Solana, or they don't quite feel that the Move ecosystem is something that is going to give them, I would say, both the closeness or the ability to get closer to the EVM and Ethereum, but also just the ability to, I would say, write the kinds of like flexible programs you want to write. Sway is much more flexible as a language because it much more closely emulates Rust than sort of like the Move language and the interpreted language. And so ultimately, Sway gets a huge sort of win for just being a really flexible blockchain language that learns a lot from Solidity and doesn't forget about that, but can basically attract your sort of Rust dev from Solana. It can attract your sort of the person who wants a different kind of experience from Sui, and as well the developer from Ethereum that just wants a different kind of system altogether. I think there's a lot of people that are pretty fed up with the status quo, even with some of these other systems or newer layer ones. Yeah.
Can you all hear me now?
Thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're good,
okay.
Okay,
brother.
cool.
We can hear you
I
loud and
figured I
clear.
would
Loud and
chime
clear,
in on
brother.
this one because that's one of the things that I'm really liking about Fuel it feels like with a lot of the other ecosystems out there, everything is kind of band-aid together. Like one particular piece of the stack, is built and maintained by a team, and then another one is maintained and built by another, and they all kind of like try to come together. Whereas it feels like with Fuel, everything is kind of integrated together with everything in mind from the same team. So you have like a CLI tool that allows you to like scaffold and test and even deploy contracts, and it's all integrated with the same team that's actually built the language Sway, where you're able to write Rust, and it feels very expressive, and it's really nice. And they even have like TypeScript libraries for front end developers, and everything just works really well together. So the developer experience, I think, does definitely set it apart.
Thanks for adding that. Just one more question. People that have looked at Fuel have probably seen a very famous table of where Fuel can play in the modular architecture, right? I'll post it in this, but it's like you have obviously like different use case, right? You have the data availability, you have the consensus, you have the settlement and execution, right? Kind of like the full module of how you would divide a blockchain. And what's interesting is in the use cases where Fuel can be the execution layer and maybe sometimes the settlement, it's in the graph at least it's always combined with Celestia. So kind of a fun question, but are you guys almost like the dynamic duo of modular architectures? You guys working together on not necessarily selling, but like on explaining how modularity can work out for developers?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we definitely, as we were both starting out at similar times, there's definitely a lot of shared sort of ideas and values between the projects in terms of building modular systems that can exist in many different configurations. And I think the main idea there is you know you want to build architecture that can exist in many forms and in many spots. And so if you're talking about Celestia, you're talking about, okay, well, this is going to come with its own security properties, pros and cons, but it's going to give you a different kind of price efficiency, scale, a different kind of system that you might be looking for if you're building, a big financial application, and maybe you don't need Ethereum's decentralization security. Maybe you need something a little less, and maybe that's kind of what you're looking for. Whereas when you're in a modular setting, it also means that Fuel can exist on Ethereum, and it can exist to basically have settlements and data availability just posting to Ethereum is normal. And so Fuel can exist in many different places, in many different configurations. And that's kind of the value out of doing this is all of the architecture is designed to live in many different places and in many different ways. And ultimately, the sum total of all of that, depending on the deployments and where they're at, is sort of the sum total of what the Fuel network will be about. Is again focusing on really good vertical integration, focusing on a blockchain that works from the UX backwards to the technology, and focusing on a blockchain that will have many blockchains, and that will basically be able to sort of meet the needs of developers um, in many different ways. And I think that again, an added benefit of building things from the start is you can have that purview. So you can do things like design your blockchain to be really good for light clients, which is something that Ethereum didn't really do. And when you get to have that added benefit, then bridging between all these different instances becomes a lot easier. Creating all kinds of different ways to interoperate these different execution layers becomes really simple. So Fuel gets this big, sort of plus or bonus in being able to live in all kinds of different places and in many different ways. But the sum total of all that is the Fuel network, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Awesome, man. Nadir, is there anything else that you wanted to add, brother?
No, I would just underscore the integrated DX and how powerful it is. And I think the main thing that, as a developer, that you want is the ability to experiment and iterate quickly. And that means being able to kind of try new things, test them out, and then try something new after that. And being able to build quickly is super important for that. And I think that when you have everything working together, it just makes it a lot easier.
Awesome, man. Well, listen, hopefully in the future we can host you Chads over at Aave or Lens Protocol up on the spaces. You're more than welcome to come up on the stage at any time, man. And yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to come on up here. I'm a huge fan of what you guys do, and I appreciate all the stuff that you and Stani have done for the DeFi industry, and I'm looking forward to all the developments coming out on your end. But I want to pass the mic over to Ruby since he hasn't really spoken the entire time. But Ruby, my man, I want to welcome you up. Sorry for the delay. This is a big speaker panel, but I want to kind of give you the mic for a bit. And I'd like to know your insights on, your thoughts on all things blockchain modularity and sort of how you see the modularity thesis come to pass over the next coming years, brother. I want to welcome you up once again, man, and God bless you.
Sure, thank you for the warm welcome. So yeah, I joined Fuel like more than a year ago, believing that blockchain is not meant to be a one-chain industry and more a multi-chain world where we can find synergies between all blockchains. And yeah, basically right now, blockchain is used by a very few people. And if we want to scale the masses, then we need to find more like scalability solutions to feed the whole world, basically. So yeah, I'm very excited about what we're doing at Fuel. And yeah, that's why I joined. And I hope that the projects that are joining us in building Fuel will be revolutionizing the way we see blockchain in general, and maybe bring tons of more users to the space.
Awesome, man. So I do have one last question to ask Nick before we wrap up here. And again, I want to thank everyone for participating up on these spaces. We're with Fuel. We're with the Fuel Network team, and I posted some things on the Nest for you guys in case you want to check that out. I've also invited some of you up to speak if you want to come up and engage in the conversation or ask Nick any last minute questions. So before we wrap up, brother, I'm interested in learning more about the role of light clients in Fuel's architecture, as far as how they enhance the chain security guarantees, and also would like to know how Fuel would ensure that they don't create central.
Yeah, so basically from the get-go, we had the opportunity to build our architecture to be really configurable for light clients. And this is really, really important when it comes to bridging. And bridging ends up being sort of your huge, basically a massive topic when you're trying to deploy many things like many rollups or many different execution environments. And it really, really comes into play at that juncture. It also comes into play for things like fraud proving, but I would say it's even more important for bridging. And the reason why it's important is because a light client really gives you a sort of high level cryptographic perspective of where a chain is at. And if your light client, system is particularly complicated to implement, you really can't do light client proofing or light client based bridging very easily between execution layers. And so this ends up really causing you a lot of issues when you're building bridges, because you end up having to do a bunch of really sort of nasty things, like you'll need to implement all kinds of weird workarounds to implement the client proofing and bridging, or really complicated messaging protocols. And as we've seen, these things are really subject to break and blow up. And that's like a huge issue in just the bridging space. And so, when you've had the opportunity to re-architect a system, then you can really configure it for light clients, and that's what Fuel did. And what this means is you can build bridges between things like two Fuel execution layers, and if they share the same DA, you can actually just introspect each other's state, because they share the same data availability layer. And then you can actually do a bridge between each execution layer without having some kind of weird sort of third party somewhere with a multisig, or some kind of other, kind of more trust oriented design. So you can create what we call like trust minimized bridges. There's sort of like some memes around this because there's a lot of different classifications of what trust minimized really means. But it, in terms of the way I approach it, it just means that it's reducing or further reducing the risk profile of doing things like bridging. So Fuel is actually excellent at doing bridging between itself, and should be pretty easy to do certain kinds of bridging between other chains. And this is especially important in the modular blockchain space because you are going to share things like the same data availability layer, and that ultimately means for certain execution layers that bridging is going to be a lot easier. It also means too, building things like shared sequencing between all of these networks is also potentially a lot easier, because you can really derive where things are a lot better. And so all these things end up being particularly important, I'd say. Yeah, but that's sort of the roundup of light clients or trust minimized light clients, and so the modular space. Yeah.
Beautiful, man. Beautiful. Dow Chemist, is there anything that you want to add before we start to wrap up? Any statements, any questions for Nick or Ruby? Feel free to go ahead, brother. It was a pleasure having you up.
Yeah, I just think this is a great conversation. You guys had some great questions, and we had some great answers from the Fuel Team Lab. So I just think that whole modular space is exciting, and those conversations are important, right? Because those are technical details that sometimes goes over the head of the end user, but it's to the benefit in terms of the fees, the security. So hey, I love those conversations. Great job, guys.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Nadir, is there anything that you want to add or ask Nick before we wrap up the space, brother?
No, that was a great space. Thanks for having me up. I'm in a couple of Telegram groups with Fuel people, so if I have any questions, I can always ask them there.
Awesome, brother. Awesome. Hopefully, you can come up on the stage one of these days, man. Would love to know your background and what Lens and Ave are up to on a deeper basis, bro. So, God bless you, man, for coming on up, bro. It was truly an honor and quite a surprise to see you up in the crowd. I just had to take initiative, and that's really the cool thing about Twitter Spaces, guys. You never know who you're gonna run into. You might go into a small space, and then a dev from Arbitra might be there, or someone from a cool DeFi protocol that you've seen. So really bullish on devs that participate on these Twitter spaces and engage with the community. I sort of think as Twitter spaces as this online virtual summit, right? And I say that because when you go to a conference, the purse size is typically a couple of $1,000s when you include room and board, your ticket, and also your flight. And when you go on these when you go to these events where your favorite dev or community thought leader participates in, it's typically in a crowded place. You can barely hear anything. There's no meet and greet, and they only have 3 to 5 minutes of mic time, right? Whether it's a Twitter space, it's more engaging, and you can be brought up and interact with a team that has you excited. So really bullish on you guys over at Fuel Network. I want to thank Nick for participating up on here, brother. I hope you had a blast, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you again. But Premise, Snorlax, if there's anything else that you want to add, if you want to add, guys, feel free to throw it at Nick's way, man. Snorlax, you have anything, brother?
No, I'm good, Wabi. I appreciate the conversation and you guys giving your time and availability. Love learning about Fuel, and yeah, excited to continue learning about it in the future and stay posted on you guys.
Awesome, man. Premise, is there anything else that you want to throw at Nick's way or at Ruby's way before we close up?
No, follow them, and yeah, it's very interesting. Keep doing some research. I got some web pages already pulled up. Appreciate it.
Awesome, man. And I posted a few things up on the nest for you guys as well. And Nick, last question would be so what is Q3 looking like for you guys? And also what's the best place to interact with the community and keep up with all things regarding fuel?
Yeah, so I would say for Q3, we have a lot of exciting stuff planned. We're gonna have a new user experience and portal coming out, and I think it'll definitely sort of set the bar for how a blockchain user experience should go. So I'm really excited about that. That's going to use a lot of like account abstraction. If you have a Mac or an iPhone, you could use Secure Enclave right out of the box with that. So that's going to be really cool. As well, I think from the user experience side, looking towards again, cheaper, faster transactions, as well. Looking at gasless transactions, native meta transactions, as well, a lot of like multi-factor experiences that we're going to put out. So I think on the user side, you're going to see a lot. Definitely on the ecosystem side, order books, etc. All that stuff is coming together. In terms of the protocol, definitely stay tuned for Q3. I think Q3 is going to be pretty special. So yeah, that's what I'll say about Q3. And then in terms of following us and just kind of keeping track of the project, if you're doing technical research or all that sort of stuff, the forum is a good place for that. If you're just wanting to chat, Discord probably the best. And yeah, if you're so fortunate, make a few good tweets or some research or interesting angles, you might find yourself in some of our more private Telegram groups and stuff. We just kind of go over everything fuel. So yeah, that's sort of the lay of the land, and then as well, obviously our Twitter. And yeah, we'll also be at ETH Lisbon. We'll be at a bunch of the conferences, so you'll probably see us around. And yeah, I would just say just expect, again, better UX and DevX. That's our main focus. That's what that's the hill we're dying on, and we don't care about all this other stuff that's going on in the space. We just want to build the absolute best thing, and that's what we're here to do. So yeah.
Awesome, dude. I posted something that Ruby put on the comments. I put up on the nest the forum for Fuel Network and also their you guys' Discord link. So appreciate you, brother, for taking the time to coming on up and talking some shop, giving your background and talking about all things fuel and modularity and L2s and all things the like. I want to give a shout out also to our speaker panel, Dow Chemist and Premise and Snorlax, as well as, of course, Nadir from Aave and Lens Protocol. If you guys enjoyed this conversation, my name is Wabi. I host these spaces all the time with devs and founders from exciting projects that I'm quite excited to interact with over the next year or two. And once again, this space is being recorded on not only on Twitter, but also via our YouTube. And same thing goes with all of our other shows. We'll have a later show today at 4:15 p.m. Eastern time with Snorlax and Premise, and we also have the boys over from Phantom, Spooky Swap, and also Equalizer later on today at 7 p.m. Eastern time. And we also have Saga XYZ tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern time. And yeah, feel free to follow us to keep up with all of our shows and our guests and all those things. And also follow Ruby, Nick, to follow what they're doing in regards to the modularity system and how fuel fits into that. And like Nick said, if you write some cool research articles or some threads, you never know, you could end up being in a private Telegram chat to discuss all things fuel and the Swaylang programming language. So feel free to follow us, guys, here at Because Bitcoin. Every follow counts, and turn on bell notifs. And Nick, I look forward to having you and some of the other team members back here on the show over the coming months. It was really exciting and informative to speak, to the man himself that came up with the idea and the man behind the vision. Right? We can read as much as we want on a project. We can read as many threads as we want, as many articles, see as many videos, but absolutely nothing will ever beat the experience of actually speaking to one of the founders one on one in a broad community space. So God bless you, brother, from the bottom of our hearts here because Bitcoin. We appreciate you, man. And yeah, thank you so much for being so open and descriptive about what it is you're building, man. I feel like communication is one of the key things when it comes to building out a new innovative product in the crypto industry. And I appreciate how you guys are building and building despite what's being heard around the world about the economy and all those things. I feel like innovation will always be innovation, and if the proof is in the pudding, then we're gonna make some nice pudding. And I like some pudding. I actually like a swirl. I like vanilla and chocolate with some Oreo cookie pieces. So speaking about that, I'm gonna go ahead and eat a steak and probably have a quick workout. I'm going to do some chest. I'm going to do some incline barbell bench presses, some flat dumbbell bench presses, some bicep curls, some lat pull downs, some barbell rows. And yeah, you guys have fun. Take care of yourselves. Health is wealth. And I hope that this space was educational and informative about all things blockchain modularity. We'll be having some more projects building around that ecosystem, but if you want to keep up with that, feel free to follow us here because Bitcoin. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you all at 4:15 p.m. Eastern time with Market Talk. Take care and God bless you.